is a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I'm Attorney Zulu Ali with the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir. This week, like we do every Sunday, we will discuss important and critical legal issues affecting our communities. Our guest today is Investigator Ralph Rocha. Investigator Rocha received a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Cal State San Bernardino, a Master of Science in Physical Education at Azusa Pacific University, and a law degree at Taft Law School. Along with his academic accomplishments, Investigator Rocha holds a wealth of experience in the investigative field as a licensed private defense and criminal investigator. He has held positions at the State of California Contractors License Board, Statewide Investigative Fraud Team, the California State Military Reserve, and most recently the Orange County Public Defender's Office. Investigator Rocha has exhibited a continuous passion for criminal justice throughout his working career and currently integrates his extensive experience in criminal and defense investigations as well as criminal law into his collegiate level criminal justice courses at Azusa Pacific University. All in all, as an adjunct professor, Investigator Rocha is committed to bringing practical, real-world learning to the classroom by enhancing a dynamic classroom environment. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Rocha.
Thank you for having me.
Today we will be discussing a couple of topics. One will be prosecutorial misconduct, wrongful convictions, and plea bargain traps. We will also take a look at some recent news stories, including the Amnesty International, who presented Colin Kaepernick with the Ambassador of Conscience Award, and we'll talk a little bit about the Philly Starbucks case. So first we'll talk a little bit about the issue of prosecutorial misconduct. And for those of you who do not know, or there may be people who don't know what a prosecutor is responsible for, basically a prosecutor, at least at the state level, are considered to be district attorneys, which are state level elected. Well, they're elected officials, and of course in this county and in most states, they're elected for each individual county, and they're responsible for, who to convict or who to prosecute. What charges to file, whether they're going to dismiss a case, whether you're going to take a case to trial, whether you're going to settle a case. I mean, a district attorney is extremely powerful because most people think, well, if you get arrested, that automatically means that you're going to be prosecuted. However, the district attorney has the ability and has the power to make a determination as to who's going to be prosecuted and what charges are going to be filed against that individual. And also, if someone is arrested and the district attorney does not feel like he wants to pursue a case, then the case is not even pursued. And then so we have prosecutors both at the state level and both at the federal level. So basically, a prosecutor is a very, very important individual in the criminal justice system. And now when we talk about prosecutorial misconduct, I mean, what actually does that mean?
In terms of a prosecutor acting wrongfully, it has a technical definition. So it's something that the prosecutor would do, some kind of conduct that the prosecutor would engage in that would be prejudicial to a defendant's case. So a prosecutor can engage in things like withholding exculpatory information. So what that means is any information that might be helpful to a defendant's case, like say, for instance, a prosecutor were to receive information from an undisclosed witness that is favorable to the defense, and they do not turn that information over to the defense. That would be an example of prosecutorial misconduct. But in addition to that, it would also have to be proven that that is prejudicial to the client's case. So it's sort of a twofold analysis when you look at prosecutorial misconduct. Another example of misconduct might be a prosecutor having a witness up on the stand or having the defendant up on the stand himself and engaging in some kind of conduct where he would berate the defendant, or he would tell the defendant, isn't it true that you're lying? Or he would tell the jury, it's only true that the defendant took the witness stand because he's trying to defend himself and he's a liar. So those are examples of wrongful actions of a prosecutor. Those are examples of prosecutorial misconduct.
Yeah. One of the cases that kind of always comes to mind for me, I remember, and I don't know if you guys remember, several years ago, it was the Duke lacrosse team when they were basically, I think it might have been a sexual assault case. They were charged with sexual assault, and throughout the process, it came to light that basically there was evidence that was actually being withheld. And ultimately, in that particular case, the prosecutor was actually, it was determined that he was engaged in preventing or not disclosing evidence that would have pretty much exonerated all of the individuals that were charged in the case. That's kind of a rarity. I don't think that you see prosecutors actually being called out on the carpet like that, or actually being put in a situation where they're actually held accountable for it. But that's one of the examples that I recall as far as the issues of prosecutors being caught. Now, in your experience, do you think that prosecutorial misconduct is like a isolated thing, or do you think that it's very common?
No, I don't think it's an isolated thing at all. I think it's more common than we believe, or that we want to know, or that than that is what is actually revealed to us. It happens a lot. The Innocence Project did a study, I believe, back in 2010 on prosecutorial misconduct, and they found hundreds and hundreds of cases just within California alone of prosecutorial misconduct where the prosecutors, for the most part, went unpunished. A small percentage of them were reprimanded. And just recently, in 2016, the state did change the law to make it actually a felony for prosecutors to withhold exculpatory evidence, and that came down from the case of Brady versus Maryland, or Maryland versus Brady, where, and you know what a Brady violation is, obviously. So no, it's not as isolated at all. As an investigator, I've seen it firsthand. You know, we can talk about theory or what we've seen in the news, but I've experienced it. I've experienced cases where, when you look at the issue of exculpatory information or withholding exculpatory evidence or information, and like I said before, that being defined as evidence that would be helpful to the defense or negative for the prosecution, you look at not only did the prosecutor have knowledge of it, but did the investigation team have knowledge of it, i.e. the police. Right. So I've had cases where, one case in particular in Orange County where I interviewed a witness, and they told me that that the person who was in custody wasn't the shooter. They knew who the shooter was, and that they told the police this in a street contact that they had with the police about a week prior, while the police officer never turned that over to the defense. So that's also a case of withholding exculpatory information, because now you have a defendant or a suspect who's in custody. You have an officer being told by a witness out on the street that it's somebody else, but they don't reveal that. Yeah. So it's not very isolated at all. I think it happens, like I said, more often than we want to believe.
Well, it seems like with prosecutors, obviously it's an elected position, and typically prosecutors like to run on the platform that they're going to eliminate crime, and also they run on the issue about they boast about their conviction rate. That's the big thing with prosecutors. You know, I got a 100% conviction rate or 99% conviction rate, and I believe that when you have that type of attitude and you have an elected official who is using the statistics of the win or loss, do you believe that the statistics as to whether someone wins or loses a case tends to be more important than getting to the bottom of the truth?
Yeah, I totally agree with that statement. I mean, fundamentally, at the very core, for what it is, prosecutors they're politicians. They're elected officials, like you pointed out. They're elected officials like the sheriff. Interestingly, public defenders are not elected politicians, but they're actually appointed by the respected board of supervisors in whatever county. So say, let's take, for instance, Los Angeles County. The public defender is actually appointed by the board of supervisors, which means they can be removed by the board, whereas the district attorney is not. He's elected by the citizens of the county. So there's an issue with accountability there. There's a huge issue with accountability, whereas they can't easily be removed, like, say, a public defender for misconduct. And then them being a politician, obviously, people are people, and people in power are people in power, and you know what I mean. If you can get the vote by showing you're tough on crime, that's going to be your goal. It's going to be statistics. And how do you show that you're tough on crime, but with numbers, and reports and stats, and to show your conviction rate. And it results in injustice for a lot of people, especially minorities, because they're being prosecuted because of policies, not necessarily because of what's just and what's not just, but because of policies that the DA has. And these policies have nothing to do with fairness or justice, but they are all aimed at getting conviction rates up in statistics. And so most definitely, I think that's a huge factor.
And I think it's interesting when you talk about district attorneys, and it seems like there's probably a lot of people that probably don't even know that district attorneys are actually elected officials. And when you talk about issues concerning, things that go on within the community, whether it's talking about the way in which a prosecutor is doing his job or things that a prosecutor is doing, very seldom, and I don't know, and Doc, you really got the ear to the community, and Bilal, but you really don't see the community meeting with district attorneys to talk about their problems very often. I haven't seen that, you know what I mean? So, in other words, if the community was to get together and hold the prosecutor's feet to the fire when it comes to running for office, do you think that would make a difference in the way that the prosecutor treated those unrepresented or underrepresented communities?
You talking to me?
Yes,
Yeah, most definitely. In like law enforcement, prosecutors use scare tactics. They use scare tactics, and they like to inflate crime rates. They like to inflate what's going on out in the community, and they run on that platform, that a tough on crime platform. Which, of course, we all want to feel safe in our communities. We all want to see crime go away. And we want people who are quote unquote going to be tough on crime, but I think a lot of it is short-sighted. To get philosophical, the answer doesn't lie in higher conviction rates. Our answers don't lie in locking people up. Our answers don't lie in what they call selective incapacitation, which means warehousing criminals, because we've shown, statistics have shown that doesn't work. So we're not holding prosecutors accountable for, and I'm talking about, not only the prosecutors at the line prosecutors, but I'm talking about these elected officials for those types of things, for being more creative in their approach to solving society's crime. And it has to go beyond just warehousing people and locking people up and being tougher on crime. There's other creative ideas out there.
Yeah. So I know that basically, as far as trying cases, the trials that go on, I mean, obviously, when people talk about the criminal justice system and the trials that go on and the cases that go on, it's always an issue about winning and losing, right? I mean, it's a very competitive thing between a prosecutor who's trying to prosecute a case and a defense attorney who is trying to represent his client. And no prosecutor wants to lose the case. And also I want to bring up something else that was really interesting, and just to kind of clarify, is that basically when you, and I know that you talked about exculpatory evidence, and what we're talking about is evidence that the prosecutor may have that may be favorable to the defense, that could allow him to be found not guilty or of the case. And also when you talk about policing, people don't understand that also police officers are considered, I guess for a lack of a better term, agents of prosecutors. So even if they have information that is critical or that's beneficial to the a person who's accused, then that information is supposed to be turned over. He's responsible for that as well. And I think that what happens is when you're involved in a criminal case, that they're responsible for turning over everything that they have to you to allow you to be able to mount the best defense that you possibly can, right? And so when you're looking at the fact that when you look at the competitiveness, now we're talking about you have a district attorney, and a district attorney's office employs assistant district attorneys, and these individuals are given cases, and they're employed by the district attorney, and their careers are on the line. Now, a district attorney who's giving a case, let's just assume you're a district attorney who's losing cases, right? Now, I mean, it shouldn't be that a district attorney or an assistant district attorney's, performance should be judged by winning or losing, right? He should basically be interested in the fairness because he represents the people, and the people includes all of us. But because a district attorney who loses a case, at least in my experience, and I know that as an investigator and being involved in these cases, I'm assuming in your experience as well, it becomes really competitive, and you lose sight of the truth, and you focus on winning.
Right. Yeah, you see that a lot. And I was just reading. I don't know if I forget which landmark decision it was. I think it was a landmark Supreme Court decision where the justices said, or one of the justices wrote in his opinion, that it's not the job of the prosecutor to win cases. It's the job of the prosecutor to bring justice. And a lot of prosecutors lose sight of that. We do have an adversarial system, meaning, the prosecutor and the defense go in there and they duke it out like two boxers would. But the prosecutor's job is a little different, like you said. It's to bring justice. It's not necessary to go in there and just win it at all cost. And you have some prosecutors who have that mentality. And I was watching a talk show, I believe it was on YouTube, where an attorney made a very good point. She said, I think that we should have sort of an open file system. So we should go beyond allowing prosecutors to turn over evidence that they think is exculpatory, and we should just allow the defense to have access to their entire file, case file. And she said, reason being is because a lot of these prosecutors are so pigeonholed in their thinking and so one-track minded that they sometimes don't even realize what's exculpatory and what's not. They're just so one-track minded. They want to get this win, and to them it's just a win. It's a statistic that they might even lose sight of. Hey, maybe this is something that the defense would need to know about or should know about. This could help their case. What really bothers me too is a lack of follow-up and the lack of investigation I see in a lot of these criminal cases. I've worked cases where guys were exonerated, guys and girls, defendants, just based on sloppy investigation. I would go out, do a follow-up investigation, and find out that none of the stuff that the officer wrote in the report was true, and it could have easily been discovered had the prosecution went and sent their investigators out to do a follow-up investigation. Now you have some poor guy in jail. His whole life has been taken from him. His relationships are strained. He might lose his job. Maybe his rent's not getting paid, whatnot, and he's not guilty of anything. He's not. And there's a sloppiness in follow-up and investigation. And what upsets me is that there's no accountability. So even though the guy's exonerated and he's released from jail, what happens to the prosecution? What is the remedy? What's the consequence? And usually there's no consequence.
Right. And that kind of leads us into the whole idea when we talk about plea deals. And, prosecutors oftentimes tend to be the masters at plea deals. And you made a good deal. And I'll give you an example that I'm thinking about. Let's just say that you got a gentleman or someone, or a man or a woman, that is accused of a criminal act. And let's just assume that and for people who don't know this, when you're accused of the criminal act, typically you're either allowed out on your own recognizance, or you're actually given what they call a bail bond, meaning that you have to pay a certain amount of money to get out of jail while you fight your case. If you don't pay the bail, then you stay in jail to fight your case. And so oftentimes what happens is, let's just say a person has a $50,000 bond and they're accused of something that they didn't do. And they've been in jail waiting to go back to court for a week. And on Monday, they are going to lose their job, they're going to lose their apartment, and their family is struggling. So the DA comes to you and says, if you plead guilty, I'll let you go home today. And people don't understand that when you fight your case, these cases, especially felony cases, if you're working up the case properly, it takes months and sometimes years to bring these cases to trial. So if you're going to fight the case, are you going to stay in jail for 2 years fighting a case, or are you going to sign that piece of paper just so that you will get out of jail at that point? And that tends to be something that's very common when it comes to the plea bargain system. I mean, and then what happens is that they threaten you. So in other words, they'll say, okay, today the offer is probation. If you don't take the probation today, it comes off the table and we're going to offer you 2 years.
Right.
You know, and it's kind of like, you know, when you're thinking about that kind of system where you're playing games with these numbers, not based upon the fact of whether this individual is innocent or not, but they kind of get you in a point strategically so that they can make you take a plea deal because you're scared of the consequences. You know what I mean? Or they'll say, well, I'm only charging you now. However, if you don't take this deal, then I'm going to add an enhancement. You know, here in California, we got a lot of enhancements. So they'll put the enhancement on you. So now, instead of 2 years, then I'm going to put that 10-year gun enhancement. They didn't see the gun, but they said they think you had a gun. So then I'm going to put a 10-year gun enhancement on you. Now you're looking at 12 years if you don't take this 2 years. And so, I mean, there's really no fairness in that, because if you don't have the money to fight your case, you're in a bad position.
Yep.
If you can't make bail and if you can't get adequate representation, you're in a bad way. And that forces people to take plea deals. Right? And do you agree with that, especially investigating for a defense?
Most definitely. And I think that it's a miscarriage of justice in that you're getting innocent people to plead guilty because they don't want to stay in jail, because they don't have the means to bail out, they don't have the means to hire an attorney. So now it's justice for the wealthy, or it's justice for people who have resources, or justice for people who have money. But for the indigent, there is no justice. And we get that all the time, where you know, and it's easy, for lack of a better word, to mess with people who are indigent on the street. To pick up some drug addict or homeless person for some petty violation, to lock them up. That person has no resources. They're going to get a public defender. They're likely not going to be able to bail out. The DA is going to dangle some carrot in front of them and say, hey, look, plead out, give us your DNA, plead guilty to this. You'll get 3 years probation. You'll get 30 days in jail or some Caltrans or whatever, and we'll be done with this case. And maybe this person really believes they have a solid case. Maybe they believe that they're in fact innocent, and they very well might be. But because of that type of pressure, and it doesn't always have to be that extreme. There's good people who are just working people who don't have means, people who are working class people who they just can't pay that 10% bail or whatever that amount is. And they're more inclined to just take a guilty plea, because they don't want to deal with this. Either one, they're scared to go to jail, because if they're gonna go beyond that court hearing and they're not gonna be able to bail out, they're gonna have to go inside the county jail to fight this case. A lot of people are just afraid to go there, you know. And so what is it? Get out today and plead guilty, or go fight your case from behind the walls of the county jail, you know? So does innocence really matter anymore?
I mean, the whole stigma of actually, you know, I think that people underestimate the significance of actually just being charged with a crime and not actually being convicted. And the reason why I say that is because once you're charged with that crime, in and of itself, it's punitive in and of itself. It's punitive even without being convicted of the crime. You're still being punished to the extent where and it could be completely unjust, and it could be one person's word against another person, and you're arrested and you go through this process, and you can imagine that. And when you talk about the Innocence Project, what is important, and I think you probably had more statistics on this, when people are, what is the percentage of individuals who actually end up pleading guilty that actually end up being found innocent later on? Yeah, you understand the question?
Right. I don't have that statistic, but I know it's there. I know it's in the literature and it's in their studies. But that happens quite often. And I don't know if you.
Yeah, I think actually if I'm not mistaken, I mean I know it's really high. I'm going to say that it's either closer to the 50% rate. So in other words, when you're looking at individuals who actually end up pleading guilty and going to jail, and through DNA, through the Innocence Projects and other, reasons, you end up finding that this person is innocent. I mean, that's significant.
Yes.
I mean, when you're talking about the numbers are anywhere between 30 to 50%, I believe, depending on what study you're looking at. But if you're looking at those kind of numbers where an individual literally takes a deal, pleads guilty, goes to prison, and you find, and we're talking about to the extent of where we found that there's a significant number of false confessions. I mean, it's crazy when you think about the fact that once you get charged with a crime, that the deck is stacked against you, and it shouldn't be that way. A person should feel comfortable that if you're accused of a crime, that basically the evidence against you is at least really significant. And I know that in the state of California, when you're charged with a felony, and in some cases they have what they call the grand juries, where you get indictments or you get an information from a preliminary hearing where they say that there has to be some sort of probable cause. And the threshold is so low that it's just unbelievable that one person can just say you did something and destroy your life. Mm-hmm. And what you have to go through in order to exonerate yourself is grueling, and it ruins you, even the entire process. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I know that we talked about accountability and changing, how we deal with it. I mean, my thing, I'm looking more towards making sure that the communities understand that you have a right to vote for these district attorneys.
Correct.
And that basically you're going to have to really start holding these prosecutors, they're holding their feet to the fire. If they're going to, if they're in your communities, just like, these other public officials, prosecutors tend to kind of like slip under the, under the radar. If you go and ask the average person, who is your district attorney in your county? Mm-hmm. Most people don't even have no idea who the district attorney is. They understand that there's people who are being accused of crimes. They understand that when you go to court, but sometimes we don't even really understand the connection,
right,
and how significant that is. And but what's your input on that?
Yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be more accountability. I don't know if there's a clear-cut answer. I know there's been a lot of suggestions. And like you said, a lot of times they tend to go unnoticed. They slip under, I think, the carpet, you said. A lot of their activities, a lot of the things that the various prosecution agencies engage in. For instance, in Orange County, there was a huge case that was just, I think, uncovered just a couple of years ago. It was actually all over the media. It happened in Seal Beach, where a man walked into a beauty salon, and I believe he murdered 8 people, including his wife, his estranged wife. That was a clear, open shut sort of case. I believe he had confessed to it. They definitely had all sorts of evidence. I think he might have been arrested at the crime scene or near the crime scene. So here, this guy kind of commits a mass killing, and that's a clear-cut case. Mm-hmm. So the Orange County DA is prosecuting this case. Well, they have a snitch program, a jailhouse snitch program or informant program, where they send snitches or informants into these cells, so they send one into his cell to get a confession from him. And this whole thing just blew up. It screwed up the whole case. It was something that was totally unnecessary. What's really ironic about this whole thing is the guy who committed the murder, the defendant, he killed his wife. He killed the lady who was actually doing her hair at the time, a beautician. This beautician's husband has been dragged through hell because this case is being dragged out now for who knows how many years. Yeah. And it can't be resolved because the Orange County DA was actually removed from the case by the judge, by the presiding judge, the judge who was presiding over the case, when it was totally unnecessary. So you even have one of the victims' husbands saying, why didn't they just play by the rules? And this whole case would have been resolved already. My wife, there would have been justice for my wife had they played by the rules. Their whole snitch program, their jailhouse informant program, was uncovered. They said that there's been evidence, or they found evidence, that it goes back 30 years. Nobody in the community knew what was going on. Huge cover-up by the sheriff and the DA. Where's the accountability there? You know, they subpoenaed officers or deputies from the sheriff's department to court to testify to this, and they all pled the fifth. And that's interesting to me, that a police officer who's being subpoenaed to court as a witness to talk about a jailhouse snitch program that supposedly doesn't exist pleads the fifth. Why would you do that unless you believed that you were going to be asked something that was incriminating? So it's dirty. People don't realize it. People don't realize that there's a lot of stuff going on out there in the system that is not okay. You know, and it's not just, it's not fair, and they like to paint a pretty picture when they run for their office, when they run for politics, when they run for DA, when they run for sheriff with their ads that they're tough on crime, they're this, they're that, but it goes a lot deeper. It goes a lot deeper than that.
Absolutely. And I think it's a public duty that we as individuals, like you say, know exactly who it is that we actually voting into office. You know, bottom line, it comes down to us. We play a role in this as well. You know, you bring a person up, you have them run for office. A lot of times we just take in consideration what we read on paper. We don't do the research for ourselves. We just say, we hear someone say, oh, I think this person is good, and we just go along with whoever, you know, suggested this person would be good, and we check the ballot, you know, or we check the box. And, you know, it's been a situation that's been going on for this long, and I don't think any law, because you said a law that was just passed, you know, that would make them accountable. I mean, but how far would that go? You know, especially with a public official. You know, it's and then the statistics, you know, I was just reading the statistics on that, saying out of 2.2 million American, 2 million of them is plea bargain cases. 20,000 of them is basically, you know, taking a plea bargain, you know, not even, they wasn't even convicted of anything. I mean, the 20,000 just took the plea bargain just, you know, just to get by, just to survive. So they won't get that life sentence, or they won't get that, you know, be away from home that long, you know. So like you say, I think, you know, when it comes down to individuals not being financially capable of, you know, getting an attorney, or, you know, that indigent, that they just basically jump on board, snatch that plea bargain, you know, do the time and get out of jail. You know, so.
That's right. What do you think about that, Doc?
Well, you know, when you look at marginalized communities, there's a lot of things that have to be considered. Most marginalized communities, the individuals in those communities are trying to survive at all costs. So many of them don't even vote because of the simple fact that 2 jobs, 3 jobs, sometimes the father is not in the house because of the incarceration. The mother's trying to hold down the family. So when it comes to really having the time to consider who your DA is, that's at the bottom of the agenda. And I think what has to happen, and this is why individuals like both of you from the legal perspective are so important, there's got to be upfront thinking. We've got to do strategic planning to where we can inform, even though they might not be able to navigate the system, at least if they have an understanding of how the system operates, they'll be able to take some proactive steps if they're caught in the legal system, or their children are caught in the legal system. Because when you think about it, it's a crisis situation. If I'm going to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, my son, my daughter gets popped, at the end of the day, most people in the community don't have an iota of an idea of what to do. So they're led by what the court system thinks, and unfortunately, so many people think the court system is a fair system. And the way they express when you go to court, you'll hear the prosecutor and the defense attorney, they'll sit there and they'll basically paint a picture that we'll do A, B, C, and this is going to be the best thing for you, and this is the way everything is going to work out. Trust us. And then they end up in a situation that you guys so eloquently expressed.
I mean, I was sitting here reading some the statistics that you've given me, Rosa, where it talked about that more than 200 people have been wrongfully convicted of murder, rape, or serious offenses since 1989. This is just in the state of California. I mean, and that's 200 people. I mean, could you, and we're talking about the what's really disturbing about those kind of case about this statistic is if you think a murder and a rape, as you know, as you obviously carry very lengthy sentences, but it's because of innocence projects and places like that they can use DNA to get. This is just the people that they've been able to use the DNA. However, as you know, there's a lot of cases where, like assaults, and different type of crimes that aren't necessarily where DNA may not even come into play, like even drug offenses and other offenses like that, where if you're convicted, the likelihood of you being exonerated if you're convicted unjustly is huge. You see what I mean? And so the numbers have to be significantly larger than 200 people that are actually convicted of these crimes unjustly. And that's disturbing. That's extremely disturbing. And so you have to ask yourself this question, and I mean the listening public has to really think about that. That it's easy for you to be accused of a crime that you did not commit. Right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, if I may say, I mean, it's so easy that there is, 60 out of 630,000 people that are in jail today, 430,000 of them, 70%, are in pretrial detention for, things that they didn't commit, or they were stopped for a minor misdemeanor. So that to me is really exasperating, because it's kind of like we have to reach these boiling points, and we go back to the death of Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, and we were talking about last week of Stephon Clark, for us to kind of realize the seriousness of these issues. So to me, it's truly impactful that we're actually talking about this stuff, because it's happening in our communities, and it's truly important for us to empower our communities to kind of come out and realize that yes, there is a public defender, there's people that you can elect, there's people that you can have a vote for, and to also understand the backgrounds that these individuals are coming from, because like Mr. Bashir just mentioned, it is hard for these people to kind of engage sometimes. So I guess my question is, kind of how can we bring these people into, out of their homes and have them get involved in this process of, electing their individuals and being more active in that aspect? And also, how can we engage and create more accountability for, our government officials to kind of, really advocate for those individuals whom they say they are going to kind of represent in Congress or in the legislative field or anywhere that they are. So
that's true. I mean, the thing that I have to say, I mean, that is the thing. I mean, we do have to begin to start taking responsibility and taking our communities back. There has to be that initiative to go out and try to do things and try to prosecutors. The jury system that we talked about last week. I mean, people have to get up, go out, and we have to do things. We can't just sit back and complain about what's going on.
Well said.
We have to definitely get involved and do something about it, because if you're going to wait for somebody to do something for you, it'll never happen.
Exactly. And you have to be proactive. I mean, I've often heard Akil Bashir always say, we in the trenches, we out there with them.
That's right.
We dealing with the youth, we dealing with the gang members and the individuals in the community. And the thing about it is, it's a sad reality, because until it affects someone directly, they don't want to be involved. And I think this is a awesome platform to actually put it out there to educate the public, whether it be on the misconduct issue, whether it be on the police brutality. But the thing of it is people are still sitting back in the confines of their home, and they just don't want to be involved until they get affected by it. And then once we talked about this not too long ago, where you go out and you have the rallies, and then you don't see no rallies no more until the next, police shooting, and it's a shame, and you ask the question, how can, we get people more involved? I mean, we've been talking for years, I mean, we've been talking about this for years, and it's kind of heartening when you sit up here and you talk and you wonder when when people gonna really, take heed to what's going on,
Yeah, there has to be a lot more proactiveness in the community.
I was looking at, I think it was an article I read, and whoever wrote this article said that 10% of the state budget goes on prison funding the prisons, and 7% goes on education. So that's a 3% difference there, and it just I can't forget this article I read. I took a class when I was an undergrad at Cal State Fullerton. And it was a criminal justice course, and the professor said, you guys are all criminal justice students. I'm going to get you into the library, and you're going to start reading scholarly articles. I'm going to show you guys how to look at this research. So he goes, pick any random scholarly article in the criminal justice section and read it. And it's these things are like boring, they look scientific, and I actually wrote a master's thesis, so I learned how to write like this later on in life. But at the time, I was 22 years old, and I'm thinking, what is this crap? But it was really interesting, because the article I chose, that I selected, was had to do with the correlation between education and recidivism. And they did this big study, and they found as education went up, recidivism went down for these individuals. So say, for instance, and I guess they tracked all these people who had either been convicted, had been in prison or whatever, the ones who had earned, say, high school diplomas, it was like maybe 50% of them went back to jail. The ones who earned AA degrees, it went down to like 30%. The ones who earned bachelor's degrees, it was like 15%. The ones who earned graduate degrees, master's, doctorates, it was almost negligible. So as education went up for these individuals, crime, or their recidivism rates, their reoffending went down. And so what does that tell us? I mean, scientifically, that's a scientific study that tells us, I'm not saying education is the answer for everybody, but it's one thing that works. So why aren't we focusing on things like that?
But that's a very excellent point you bring up, Ralph, because what education does, it provides additional options. And see, this is what happens time and time again. If I don't have options, what we talked about last week, I'm going to go with those things that are placed before me. In our community, and Mike, you said it so well, we have too many volunteer victims. We have to stop that mentality. We have to change that mentality. People think they want to get motivated, and so when they get motivated, they're going to take action. But it's actually the other way around. Action is what is indicative of motivation coming. The action comes first, and then the motivation comes. We sit back too often, and we wait for somebody to define the reality in which we operate from, and that's what community ownership is. It's mandated that we have to, if we're going to own our communities, we have to search out knowledge. We have to search out that component that is going to move us in a self-defining direction, and we don't do that enough, and that is something that we have to instill back in our communities. Nobody owes you anything moving forward. Look, I love my communities to death. I'm in the streets every day, but at the same token, what really bothers me is the handicapping of the individuals in the community, feeling that they cannot become self-determined in leading their own direction. We have to change that mindset.
Absolutely. That's really important. We definitely have to begin to start making some sort of sacrifice, and sometimes the sacrifices, I mean, voting, or going to jury duty, I mean, and being involved, you know. And so, you know, we have to continue to go back to the state of being proactive
Yes.
and not reactive, you know. I mean, and I think that we get comfortable, and until it affects someone in our homes or someone we know personally, then we don't want to do anything. And you know, and that's something that if we don't change that, then they're not going to change it for us. It's going to continue to be the same way.
Do we think we actually look for a leader to actually be out in the forefront to kind of guide us or give us some type of direction? That's why we sit back, because there's no one out in the forefront.
Yes, that's exactly why. I mean, you know, I've heard. I remember I had a. I'm going to tell this story. I don't know if I should tell the story, but anyway, I have a Facebook page that has my law office thing on it, and there's been at least 2 responses where the person says, "What has he done? I don't know him. What has he done for the black community?" You know what I'm saying? So, you know, in other words, we're always trying to figure out what anyone else is doing. That's not the question. The question is,
Thank
what
you.
have I done
Thank you.
for the community?
Yes.
What am I doing? When is the last time I went and tried to rally individuals to
Teach.
go and try to vote? When is the last time that I went and tried to educate people about the importance of jury duty? And, you know, so it's all about the things that you're doing
Teach.
that really makes the difference. And until we get to a point where we're beginning to become more proactive and involved in doing things in our own community, we have the answers. And we can't depend on someone else to lead us out of it. You have to depend, you know, on yourself.
Well said.
To try to make these differences and to get involved. And it involves more than just putting something on Facebook or Instagram or something like that. You have to get up, you have to go out, you have to do something and stop. As Doc always say, you can't always be the victim. You have to go out and you have to make moves. You have to do things. You have to be involved, and it takes more than just an emotion.
Yes.
You know, the emotional response of protesting, and then as soon as, you know, it's like you tear up stuff, and then as soon as that's over, then you don't hear anything else, and then it happens again, and then it happens again, and it's happening again. I mean, it's, you know, there's solutions out there, and we need to rally those who are concerned in our communities and those who aren't in our communities that are concerned to get involved and stuff like that. And speaking of that, I think that we talked about earlier about Colin Kaepernick. I think you had something on Colin Kaepernick. What happened recently with him?
So recently, he was awarded an award for the Ambassador of Conscience Award on Saturday through Amnesty International. So it says the Ambassador of Conscience Award celebrates the spirit of activism and exceptional courage. And since Kaepernick is an athlete who is now widely recognized for his activism because of his refusal to ignore or accept racial discrimination. So basically, he was given an award for kind of standing up for his beliefs in the NFL. So, yeah.
So, and we're talking about trying to be active, and I mean, you know, everybody. Colin Kaepernick has been a big subject of debate. For a long time about the fact. I mean, of course, they attacked his patriotism because he refused to not stand for the flag. And I've always been the type of person who believed that. I mean, it's about the message. I think more than his actions. Like, for example, let's just say that Tom Brady decided he wanted to take a knee because he was concerned with, let's just say, our support for law enforcement officers. So he takes a knee. He says, our country, I don't believe that we support law enforcement officers the way that they do. I wouldn't have a problem with it. You know what I mean? I would respect his right to do that.
Well, it's just like the Riverside police officers who killed Taisha Miller shaving their heads years ago. And I don't think a whole lot of people remember that case.
Good point.
But they did. The white officers who killed her shaved their heads in solidarity. And they had every right to do that. That was their constitutional right to do that. And I told my students that the other day in class. One of them said, Trump this, Trump that. And I said, you have every right to say that. I said, just like the opposing side does. And I think that that we do have to respect each other's views. But yeah, I mean, it's people get so inflamed because they're small-minded, you know, and they see things from their perspective, and whenever a different perspective is thrown at them, they just can't tolerate it, you know, and so, you know, another thing I was going to say is, as we're talking about these issues, a lot of them are the social issues are kind of where everything kind of flows from. You know, it's like the biblical story of Cain and Abel. You know, Cain said, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Of course you are. You are your brother's keeper. You know, and I think until we start to realize that in society, that yeah, you know, you are to you know, care for the community. You have an obligation. You're a member of society. You're a member of community. Don't wait for somebody else to rally, to stand up, to address these issues. Why don't you do it? You know, you organize something. Right. You go out there and spread the word. You know, I think there has to be some sort of personal conviction that we have of obligation to address these issues.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about the greatness of, you know, and I'll be the first to say, I mean, you know, I served in the military. I'm proud of the fact that I served in the military, and I believe that America, you know, in many ways is the best act in town. But it depends on your reference point. Yeah. It's those protests that made us great. It is the protest of individuals such as Brown v. Board of Education. Yeah. I think you look at the Brown v. Board of Education and the aftermath of the Civil Rights Movement and all the Civil Rights Acts that came out of that made us a great nation. Yeah. You know, it's protest.
Yes. Well, you know, taking a stand is not taking a seat. When we protest, first of all, let's clearly understand we have a human right to protest, not a legal right to protest. Being humans in this society gives us a right to protest. See, we far too often we forget the human rights in terms of the worldwide perspective. You know, when you look at Minister Malcolm, he was killed because he wanted to take America before the International Court, which was the UN. Usually a protest is usually started by one or two individuals. They are upset because the conditions that they are currently in, they cannot tolerate them any longer. So protest is inevitable, and they stand up and protest. And I think most people, when I look at the young adults today, I was there for the 65 revolt. I was there for the 92 revolt. I was on the ground in that revolt because I think it was so imperative. And let's be clear, it was not riots, it was revolts. People were revolting against the conditions that were prevalent at the time. And when you think about you know, the nature of protests, okay, look at what Colin did. This was a silent protest, okay? First, you're condemned for physical protest, you're condemned for aggressive protest, but here was a man who took a knee to protest what he felt was unjust conditions by a certain group of people, and then he was basically assassinated for that. So you tell me the context of protest by the people in power. What type of protest would they like? Would they like the type of protest Colin did? Or would they like the protest of 65 and 72 of very aggressive nature? You know, we have to look at that dogma. And I would say lastly, I think us on the ground in the communities who think we're protesting, there's a big difference between a protest, how best can I say this, a movement and a moment. A real protest is a movement. You get people together and you move for a cause, and then you try to create the conditions to change that cause, which is the betterment of all. But a movement, a moment is when we, as Michael so alluded to, we go out, and you did too, Brother Ali, we physically engage on a emotional level. We feel good, we rant and rave, and then we go back. There's no plan of action. There's no strategic structure in place. There's no infrastructure to move us in a direction. That's useless.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's kind of when we look at, we always like to end up talking about solutions, and I appreciate your input. I know that your experience, I mean, we've worked together before in the past quite a lot actually, and I know that basically we talk about prosecutors. We want to encourage our people to find out who your prosecutor is, who your DA is, get involved, do what you need to do to hold these individuals accountable. And so I guess that's it for this edition. We've run out of time, I believe. Again, thank you again for Investigator Rocha.
Thank you for having me.
And my team, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Justice Watch with Zulu Ali. I'm Zulu Ali, and we'll see you next week. Same time, same place, same channel. Good evening.
Need some get back. Payback. Payback. That is. Payback.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3